The ground is still shaking from the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, just a seismic, shocking event that has ripped through the political commentary.
Absolutely devastating.
But here is the core, provocative question our sources force us to ask immediately. How does the firing of a late-night comedian, Jimmy Kimmel, get discussed as an act of war in the same breath as some are apparently celebrating a political murder?
That juxtaposition, I mean, the moral chaos of those two events being weighed on the same scale, that seems to be the central crisis point of our culture right now, according to these sources.
Right.
And today we are conducting a deep dive into the raw, unfiltered commentary surrounding this tragic flashpoint. Our mission, and this is true to the spirit of Kaizen, that principle of continuous, relentless improvement and understanding, is to break down the highly charged narratives, the wildly conflicting conspiracy theories, and the sobering cultural conversations happening beneath the surface.
We want to turn that noise into necessary knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Something you can use to navigate this moment.
Exactly.
So we're going to discuss if this moment marks a true turning point in America, where words stopped being enough and physical violence took their place.
A terrifying thought.
As we dive in, if you think this crisis indicates a necessary change is upon us, write N for now in the comments right now. Let us know.
Or if you think it's just business as usual, maybe sadly so, right? Y for, whatever.
Yeah, Y for, whatever. We want to see what you think.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate fallout. The sources focus heavily on, the shocking ethical calculus presented, how different segments of the media weighed the importance of a political murder versus a career setback.
It's this stunning moral inversion, right?
Right.
That's what the commentary highlights straight away.
Yes. You're talking about that stark contrast in responses. The commentary points out that those on the political left who allegedly justified or maybe even celebrated the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
And the sources often pointedly describe him as a young father of two.
They do, to emphasize the human cost. These were apparently the very same figures who immediately turned around and called the implied suspension or firing of Jimmy Kimmel by Disney ABC an act of war.
An act of war over a TV host.
The sources argue it's not just hypocrisy, it's a profound revelation of priorities. It suggests, according to this commentary, a bizarre prioritization where protecting a late-night host's job,
a host often seen as using his platform for deeply partisan political attacks.
Right. That job apparently outweighs the actual physical violence and death of a conservative public figure. To paraphrase one observer in the source material, it's the absurdity of treating one man's highly compensated career as more sacred than another man's life.
Especially when that host is viewed by these commentators as basically a political tool.
Yeah.
And this feeds directly into that intense debate over what constitutes hate speech, doesn't it?
Oh, right.
And whether the law should step in.
Precisely. That argument surfaced vehemently on the right, specifically concerning comments attributed to Pam Bondi. She apparently suggested prosecuting hate speech that targets groups citing language like "kill all Republicans."
Wow.
The commentary segment supporting this view argues that such extreme rhetoric isn't just harmless venting, it, quote, directly leads to events like the Kirk assassination.
So for them, it's not censorship, it's prevention, self-defense.
That's the argument presented, that drawing a hard legal line against extreme dehumanizing language is necessary self-defense now to prevent more political violence.
But the sources also show immediate pushback, right? Even from within conservative circles, against Bondi's stand.
Oh, absolutely. There's internal opposition. One critique suggests that while her impulse to defend the community is understandable, she might be, quote, dog whistling for political effect. And in doing so, she's taking up, quote, considerable collateral damage among her own supporters. That's the fear.
That's the critical nuance, isn't it? Those opposing Bondi from the right worry that any legal restrictions on speech, no matter how hateful, give the government power to define and prosecute political thought.
Exactly. They see it as a dangerous expansion of state power, could be turned against them eventually.
Who draws the line? And who holds the line without becoming a censor?
That's the struggle. Balancing free expression against the demand for physical safety. It's a central theme in these sources.
And that struggle seems compounded by these observed corporate power shifts. If the moral calculus is warped, the corporate calculus seems, pretty cynical too.
Yeah, the sources highlight a perception of corporate weakness, or maybe calculated positioning. They note that Sinclair is quickly, quote, backing away from Charlie Kirk after the tragedy, almost treating him as radioactive.
While ABC is seen to be, quote, edging back toward fully embracing Jimmy Kimmel.
Right. This perceived lack of corporate backbone, this willingness, as the commentators see it, to abandon a conservative figure after a tragedy while shielding a liberal one after controversy, it just fuels immense cynicism among these observers.
Okay, listener question here. If you are surprised by this observed lack of corporate moral backbone mentioned in the source material, right, okay now, just okay.
Because the next layer of analysis in these sources, it gets even more critical. It treats late-night comedy not as harmless entertainment at all.
Oh, what then?
As a deliberate corporate political tool.
Okay.
The broader perspective articulated in the commentary suggests these late-night shows have fundamentally transformed. They argue the genre has moved way beyond the funny, entertaining days of, say, Johnny Carson or even early Leno.
So what's their purpose now, according to this view?
Twofold, apparently. First, acting to spread other propaganda, and second, functioning critically as, quote, money laundering for the pharmaceuticals.
Whoa, okay, let's pause there. Money laundering for the pharmaceuticals. That's a really specific and strong claim. What mechanism are the sources pointing to?
It's framed as a mechanism of corporate political utility. The sources argue that major pharmaceutical companies pour massive advertising budgets into these late-night shows.
Okay, standard advertising, right?
Well, yes, but because the shows are positioned as entertainment, but spend, a huge amount of their time attacking one political side, the money flow functions, according to this argument, to subsidize political messaging under the guise of commercial ads.
Ah, so the ad spin props up the political attacks.
That's the theory. By funding these platforms, the argument goes, pharmaceutical and other corporate interests are essentially paying to keep the political attack apparatus running, masking political contributions as legitimate advertising spend.
So the hosts aren't seen as entertainers?
Not primarily, no. They're viewed as high-paid political operatives whose professional survival is purely a function of political utility for their corporate and political backers. That's the cynical take from these sources.
That transforms the entire field into an existential battleground. Which brings us to that deeper philosophical point raised by the commentators. The raw power of words.
Yeah, one source framed it powerfully, saying that, quote, words are our substitute for unceasing violent revolutions.
That's profound.
It is. The sources are arguing that political argument, debate, culture war rhetoric, as painful and ugly as it can get, it's the necessary modern replacement for that constant cycle of coups, purges, bloodshed that defined earlier centuries.
Political speech as the pressure release valve.
Exactly. So the mistake, according to this commentary, is treating talking and arguing and debating as if it's just vibrating air, as if it doesn't matter.
Because when political actors stop fighting with words,
or lose faith in that process,
they shatter that social contract.
That's the warning. The source material warns that when that happens, they, quote, open the door for the monsters of the 19th century to crack their knuckles and get back into the streets.
Chilling.
And this current surge in political violence is viewed by these observers not as some random anomaly, but as the predictable, tragic consequence of devaluing the political debate itself, treating words as just noise until the physical action starts.
So, as this chaos unfolded, fueled by that deep distrust we talked about, a second wave hit the internet, right? This proliferation of wild, often conflicting conspiracy theories about the assassination, the shooter.
Oh, yeah. It immediately became a full-blown narrative war. This section of the sources is fascinating because it shows how quickly a planned narrative can just collapse.
How so?
The sources detailed the immediate characterization of the shooter, identifying them with a very specific, highly charged label. The sources state the term used was a dick-sucking tranny furry lover.
Okay, that exact phrase is in the source commentary.
Yes, reported directly. And that specific identity immediately upended the expected political narrative flow.
It shattered Plan A, as the commentators called it.
Right. Plan A, the source's outline, was supposedly the political left celebrating the death, maybe even calling for the murder of Kirk's family and other conservatives, viewing the assassin as some kind of progressive hero.
But when the shooter's identity was confirmed, that their guy, as the source puts it, was a member of a marginalized group often associated with the far left.
They had to scramble, desperately trying to pivot to Plan B.
And Plan B was?
The attempt to quickly reframe the entire event, shift the blame. This included what the sources call a failed, quote, ham-fisted trap, focused on a theory called Groy parification.
Okay, Groy parification. For listeners maybe not deep in the online trenches, What exactly is a groyper?
A groyper, generally speaking, is a term for a specific, often pretty extreme faction within the far-right or Magie movement, sort of nationalist anti-establishment.
Got it. So the groyperification theory was
A desperate attempt, the sources say, to pin the violence on Magie extremists, suggesting that the shooter, despite their, obvious online persona, was secretly a false flag agent of the right. Someone who was groyper adjacent trying to cause trouble for the movement.
a pretty complex double bluff theory.
Yeah, and apparently it fell apart quickly. Undermined by the strange digital evidence circulating, including these purported text messages between the shooter and a furry.
The text didn't seem credible.
One commentator just dismissed them outright, said they sounded, quote, fake as F, like dialogue from really bad /fic.
/fic. Wow. Okay.
So this swift failure to control the narrative just compounded the cynicism.
But the narrative wars didn't stop there, did they? Because the official story was immediately suspect to so many observers, they went full deep state and foreign enemy.
Which is really a symptom of that profound distrust in American institutions we mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yes, the sources catalog these specific circulating theories suggesting complete institutional failure or even active malice.
What kind of theories?
Claims like, 1, the deep state or a foreign enemy killed Kirk, suggesting a professional execution. 2, 2 shooters were involved, implying a cover-up. 3, the killer, identified in some circles as Bucky, is being framed maybe as a convenient scapegoat. And 4, this bizarre detail that a jet that supposedly left the scene was owned by a high-profile CEO, hinting at some kind of corporate complicity.
Just layer upon layer suspicion.
And then one of the most outlandish claims ties into an anti-Semitic angle, apparently promoted by groups like Oregon Antifa, according to one source.
Which was?
The idea that Israel's Mossad killed Kirk.
Mossad. Why?
This is where the conspiracy level seems strategically weaponized. The claim goes that Kirk was killed because he was starting to ask hard questions about why there was a stand-down order on October 7th, suggesting he was about to turn explicitly anti-Israel.
But the sources dispute that.
They find it absurd, pointing out Kirk was a devout Christian who actually, quote, celebrated the Jewish Sabbath regularly. The analysts cited believe the specific outlandish claim was promoted with the sole intention of trying to, quote, fracture the right and destroy the conservative coalition. Pure disruption.
This overwhelming flood of conflicting theories. Ludicrous. Sinister. It leads to the final sobering takeaway of this section, doesn't it? Why are people so quick to believe any counter-narrative?
Yeah, it boils down to a failure of institutional credibility. The commentary suggests people easily accept these complex conspiracy theories because they're convinced the DOJ and FBI are structurally compromised, quote, infested as to hinder such operations of justice.
So they believe evidence would be buried.
That's the feeling, that they would inevitably be burying the evidence if it implicated the left or the deep state. For these observers, the failure isn't that the conspiracies exist, but that the official agencies have lost all moral authority to dismiss them.
They feel like every day is the same, no accountability.
Which fuels the belief that nothing official can be trusted. A really dangerous place to be.
Okay, another check-in with you, our listeners. If you feel a similar level of distrust in official narratives right now, just write the number 1 in the comments. Simple 1.
And if you still generally trust the primary media sources and official accounts, write the number 0. No judgment, we just want to get a sense of where you stand on this critical issue.
Okay, so moving beyond the immediate political violence and the conspiracy theories, the sources reveal this really deep cultural and spiritual anxiety.
Yeah, the commentary starts linking the political violence and extremism to deeper, almost foundational societal failures. In morality, in structure.
This is where the discussion gets intensely personal, sociological.
Yeah.
The commentary suggests that the issues fueling rage and extremism in young people, particularly young men, it, quote, boils down to sex.
Boils down to sex. That's a blunt assessment, presented as a fundamental biological drive that's being thwarted by cultural failure.
That's the core hypothesis detailed in the sources. It's stark. Youth, particularly young men, are biologically hardwired, the argument goes, to seek procreation, form families, build community.
But, the sources argue, modern Western culture actively encourages, quote, abnormal ways of relating, or maybe discourages traditional ways. And the result is deep disappointment, frustration, and eventually political rage.
Are there specifics cited? data points.
Yes, the sources cite specific anxiety-inducing points that underpin this theory. They point to anxieties about 30-year-old virgins, discussions of long-term celibacy, and statistical reports suggesting young men are reporting being in relationships at roughly half the amount as women.
Half the amount, wow.
The conclusion drawn by the commentators is stark. Sexual access has been increasingly cut off for a significant portion of the male population, leaving them adrift and angry.
That is a heavy societal observation. If you accept that premise that youth are biologically programmed for family formation, though what the source material calls the first morality,
right,
and the culture systematically thwarts that, then the resulting terrifying question posed in the commentary is, where does that hardwiring find an outlet?
And the implication is clear, isn't it? The energy designed for procreation and building gets redirected into destructive political violence and extremism. The ultimate social consequence, in this view, of radical societal engineering.
And this cultural critique extends deeply into religion too, specifically critiquing the failure of what the sources label nice Christianity.
Oh yeah. There's a strong, almost radical call in the commentary for a return to a more reverent, traditional, and morally assertive faith structure.
The critique of modern faith sounds unsparing.
It is. The sources argue that Christians in the 1990s, early 2000s focused too heavily on love and mercy and forgiveness.
To the exclusion of what?
To the exclusion of moral truth and clear boundaries, according to this critique. This, they claim, led to the normalization of cultural perversion and the failure of nice Christianity to hold the line against secularizing forces.
There's a real sense of loss there.
Definitely. The commentators suggest that traditional believers were effectively forced out of their own churches because the progressive vanguard, what they cynically refer to as the vanguard of the gay, was already taking over, causing immense heartbreak among congregants.
So what's the proposed theological solution in these sources?
A need to return to an older form of faith, one that consciously values reverence and repentance, rather than constantly trying to cater to modern secular sensibilities. It's viewed as necessary to restore moral fortitude.
Yeah, and the religious hypocrisy critique tied to the assassination itself.
Particularly sharp. Commentators criticized bishops and other church leaders for having, quote, nary a word to see about a Christian being assassinated,
while focusing on other issues,
but having, quote, spouted endlessly about a fentanyl addict dying. This is framed as a profound betrayal, prioritizing secular, politically convenient causes over defending members of their own flock facing actual violence.
It shows a deep split within faith communities, doesn't it, over what constitutes true moral priority.
Absolutely. And the final, really radical spiritual call is directed at the opposition. One source mentioned praying fervently for the commies, their term to repent now and perform acts of contrition to save their souls.
That's beyond political strategy. That's a theological demand.
For immediate, fundamental moral transformation.
Yeah.
But crucially, the sources also observed that the emotional impact of the assassination and the subsequent public celebration by some extreme voices, it caused a significant moral reckoning among some on the left, too.
How so?
The commentary notes that the celebration, quote, disturbed lefties with functional consciences, such as Shoe on Head, leading them to what the source calls the terrifying realization that those people are evil.
That realization, it forces a shift.
It forces a moment of clarity, apparently, and it leads directly back to that core concept of the first morality, which we touched on earlier, the family protection instinct.
Right, the belief that one's first moral duty is to protect family. That becomes the foundation for a kind of survivalist worldview.
Exactly. The sources argue that this realization sets up the ultimate conflict. If one side feels bound by traditional morals, but perceives the other side as, quote, psychopathic, willing to do anything, including celebrating murder,
then conflict becomes inevitable in their view.
That's the narrative of the family protector, right? Forced into a defensive posture focused on preserving the foundational moral structure and kin because the larger society seems to have failed them.
Sheer pain and anguish of feeling morally abandoned. It forces people back to that primary protective instinct.
It's a fundamental reordering of values in response to what feels like an existential threat. That's the argument being made.
Okay, amidst all this political turmoil, cultural chaos, the sources offer a really necessary grounding pivot. They show robust, real-world community activity, intense intellectual pursuits.
Yeah, it's a demonstration of cultural resilience, isn't it? Self-improvement, kaizen in action, even when the world outside feels like it's fragmenting.
These activities aren't just distractions. They feel like a proactive antidote to the cynicism. Let's talk about the Texas Moan.
Yes, the MOM.
For those unfamiliar, MOM stands for the meat of the egress, or meat of the meme. And this gathering is repeatedly highlighted in the sources as a central source of community camaraderie.
A place where people find genuine, supportive family, as they put it, outside the digital battlefield.
The community feeling described by attendees is really moving. Commentators describe their first time attending, maybe thinking, okay, I'll give this a try.
A bit hesitant, maybe.
But by the next year, they feel like they can't wait to see your family again. That rapid, deep level of inclusion and shared values. It's a powerful form of cultural defense, isn't it?
It really seems to be. And they don't just gather to talk, they engage in serious practical activities, particularly around firearms and preparedness.
The discussion around firearms in the sources is extensive. It's detailed, highly technical.
Oh, yeah. We hear about attendees bringing a huge range of firearms. Everything from classic utility guns like a Walther .22 pistol or a Ruger single 6.22 revolver.
Old school reliable.
Right. Up through modern survival tools like the Ruger 1022 takedown and serious tactical platforms like the PSA AR-15 and a larger PSA GN3 PA-10 .308W Win rifle.
And the conversation isn't just about having the guns. It's about practical, real-world logistics.
Exactly. We see people discussing the specifics of travel, noting flaunting limitations, maybe opting to take a simple, reliable gun like a Henry .357 lever-action rifle instead of a long gun that's harder to check with an airline. Practical choices.
The sources even detailed the performance of that PSA GN3 PA-10 .308 with different bullet weights. It shows a real focus on technical knowledge, defensive capability.
It's hands-on preparedness combined with serious, high-quality culinary endeavors, a true feast.
The planned meals sound incredible, blending hunting and cooking expertise.
Yeah, mentions of jalapeno peppers stuffed with venison, wild boar sausage, and Oaxaca cheese. That sounds amazing.
It really does. And for the main course, classic American staples, pork shank and the highly prized Silver Queen corn.
This blend of practical skill and communal enjoyment. That seems to be the essence of a resilient community described here.
Okay, let's ask you, our listeners, are you part of an amazing community that brings people together for shared activity, friendship, support right now? Tell us about it by writing nice in the comments. Just nice.
Yeah, we'd love to hear. It proves that while the national culture wars rage, people are actively building strong, positive local structures, ways to weather the storm.
And beyond the physical community, there's this fierce intellectual appetite documented in the sources. This is Kaizen in action again, isn't it? People dedicated to reading, self-improvement, acquiring knowledge outside the mainstream noise.
Yeah, definitely. The reading thread discussion is packed with intellectual recommendations, explorations.
Or kind of stuff.
We see classic hard science fiction like Larry Niven's The Goliath Stone, deep dive naval history with C.S. Forester's The Good Shepherd, a classic WWII tale of convoy duty.
A great one.
And dark American realism from Richard Yates. Though listeners are given a critical warning, if you're looking for something cheerful, maybe steer clear of Yates's unflinching realism.
Noted.
And a particular focus is placed on a deep dive into naval history, the rules of the game, Jutland and British Naval Command by Andrew Gordon.
Jutland, okay.
This book isn't just recounting the famous WWI battle, it's praised for detailing the entire culture of the Royal Navy at the time, correcting previous historical works, and offering lessons the current U.S. Navy should follow. That's the claim.
Okay, hang on. What's the application of a 100-year-old British naval history book to modern American policy? That seems like a stretch.
Well, the sources specifically mention that the lessons learned about command structure, planning, maybe even risk aversion from Jutland are directly applicable to today's geopolitical threats.
Like what?
The suggestion is that the U.S. Navy needs to adopt lessons like conducting more intensive red cell training, simulating enemy tactics against potential high-end adversaries like the Plan, the Chinese Navy.
Ah, so applying history to future defense strategy. Classic Kaizen.
Exactly. And on a more personal level, people are finding joy in tangible personal growth, achieving goals. We see these joyful anecdotes, like the woman who finally finished assembling her new luxury push mower, tangible self-reliance.
I like that. And the story of the man who started a massive Charles Dickens reading project.
Yeah, specifically to avoid having to read, quote, woke modern fiction. It's presented as a deliberate turn toward timeless literature, foundational Western thought, as an intellectual antidote to contemporary confusion.
Interesting.
And finally, we can't forget those miscellaneous data nuggets scattered throughout the sources. Proof that curiosity and the desire for granular knowledge never sleep right.
Like what? Give us an example.
We learned the geographical specifics of Bunker Hill Community College in Massachusetts, that it has both the main Charlestown campus and the Chelsea campus. Local details matter.
Okay. Anything else random but interesting?
We also got deep into baseball metrics, specifically for a very young future prospect, Hunter Nadeau, class of 2030. Detailed discussion of his on-base plus slugging, OPS, and slugging percentage, SLG.
Class of 2030. That shows a dedication to tracking long-term talent development in American sports, I guess.
Or just intense fandom. And for those tracking the cosmos, there were detailed notes on planetary events. A reminder that some things, unlike human affairs, are predictable.
Like?
Specifically, the Saturn opposition occurring at 1:45 a.m. EDT on September 22, 2025. And the visible Titan shadow transit, noting there's only one more coming on October 6th before a 15-year hiatus.
Wow. Even in its chaos, the stars are dependable. A nice thought.
A grounding thought, yeah. Hashtag tag outro.
So this deep dive, guided by that principle of Kaizen continuous improvement and understanding, it's revealed a nation really grappling with the immediate violent consequences of dehumanizing political rhetoric.
Yeah, we've analyzed that warped moral calculus, weighing a comedian's job against an actual assassination.
Yeah.
How that fuels profound distrust, wild conspiracy theories.
But crucially, the sources show that powerful undercurrent too. A community seeking refuge, seeking clarity amidst the chaos, leaning on history, hobbies, practical skills, local camaraderie, guided by that family protector instinct we discussed.
That's right. And the ultimate question raised by all this commentary, it isn't just about the tragedy itself, is it? It's about the future trajectory of American society.
How so?
Well, when some figures call for a radical return to tradition, to reverence and repentance, that older form of faith, and others seem to advocate for doubling down on aggression, perceived psychopathic tactics, you see two fundamentally different worlds diverging rapidly.
The core battle, as highlighted by our sources, is for the moral and intellectual soul of the country.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which leads us to our provocative final thought.
Yeah.
This is taken directly from the source material. Some observers believe that the current generation, increasingly allowing AI to do all their thinking, their moral heavy lifting, they'll face a dark future where, quote, in the land of the brain dead, the one brain cell man will be king.
Oof, that's a stark warning.
So, the question for you to ponder. Is the current cultural chaos merely the predictable, violent result of a society that stopped valuing critical thought and foundational moral structure, choosing rhetorical violence over intellectual debate?
Pause this deep dive right now and share your thoughts on that. Or if you have a powerful story about finding community or knowledge during this intense cultural moment, like something similar to the Texas Mome, or a great book recommendation that helped you, we need to hear it. Tell us in the comments.
Please don't forget to like and share this deep dive if you found value in this breakdown. You are the most important part of this conversation, and your insight contributes directly to our Kaizen process.
We really appreciate you joining us on the deep dive.